Module 1, Section 2 is going to introduce you to China under the Ming Dynasty. You want to recognize that under the Ming emperors, China was a relatively wealthy state and had the means and the technology to explore possibly as far as the Americas. But what we have with later Ming emperors after the Emperor Yongle is a reversal of foreign policy and actually a destruction of the Chinese Navy. But you should keep in mind that China was wealthy, it was technologically advanced, and it had large urban areas and a big population, which in this period of time, the 1400s, was one of the biggest signs of wealth. So on the very front slide of the PowerPoint, I actually have two vases, one from the Ming Dynasty and one from the later Qing Dynasty. And porcelain is going to be a very important trade good for China under the Ming and the Qing dynasties. You might be surprised to try and guess how much the vase with the fish, the larger one on the right-hand side, sold for. In 2011, it sold at a Sotheby's auction in Hong Kong for, wait for it, 43 million pounds. And the one in the upper left is actually a smaller vase. And the story goes, if you were following this in the newspaper in 2012, that a couple had inherited this and they didn't know what to do with it and they weren't particularly fond of it, so they were using it as a doorstop. But then once they heard it was Chinese porcelain and of some value, they also sold it for $1.3 million, and that was on September 12th of last year. So the Ming Dynasty lasted from 1368 to 1644, and Ming translates to brightness, and it's surprisingly reminiscent of the Renaissance and the rebirth. This was a great period for innovation in Chinese art. The Ming emperors rebuilt the infrastructure of China, so they had those construction projects. They rebuilt the Great Wall, which under the Ming emperors reached nearly 4,000 miles in total. They restored the Grand Canal system, which promoted internal trade in China, and they built a new capital in Beijing. Overall, what happened under the Mings, especially the early Ming emperors, is that China rebounded from a period where it had been subjugated by the Mongols in the 1200s and the 1300s. Under the Mongols, China had been broken up into two pieces, into the northern and the southern pieces, and under the Mings it was unified, and we start to see a recovery from the things that plagued Chinese society a century earlier. So in the 1300s, China was suffering from disease such as the Black Death. We had horrible natural disasters. We had big economic problems. People were forced to pay very high taxes to the Mongols. The Mongol state had problems maintaining the infrastructure, and there were a lot of revolts. One of the big ones was when the Mongols tried to force peasants to repair dikes, and about 100,000 peasants joined into revolt. So the Mongol rule wasn't popular. They were associated with persecution of certain ethnic groups in China, and there were two main competing rebel factions who tried to overthrow Mongol rule. And the one that was successful is the one we associate with this new Ming emperor, who's going to change his name to Hongwu, our first Ming emperor, in 1368. So if you flip the slide, you see that under our early Ming emperors, like Hongwu, China is unified. North and south are brought back together again. China has the largest empire of the world, and we can see, if you look at that map, some of the holdings that it was collecting tribute from. It had a quarter of the world's population, and we're going to have about 250 years of general prosperity under our Ming emperors. The first Ming emperor, Hongwu, who I've been referring to, was from a peasant background, and he uses this throughout his reign to legitimize his policies. The way the legends about him go, his parents were so poor that they had to give up all his other siblings for adoption or as child brides, and he was the only one they were able to support. So once he came to power militarily, he tried to, quote, call people back to the land. He was really invested, at least theoretically, in supporting the farmers since his parents had been poor farmers, and he wanted to save them from the same harsh conditions, the disease, the flooding, the starvation that his family had faced. So some of the things that he does accomplish is he, over a 20-year period, has government ministers compile the Ming Code. And the Ming Code, I've looked at just the index from it. If you want to Google it, I found it by Googling National Archives, the Ming Code. It's been translated and stored in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. And just the index of it is pages and pages and pages long. So you end up scrolling for about 5 minutes just to get through the index. And this has lists and lists and lists of punishments for crimes. It has lists about tax rates. It has lists about expectations for what you're supposed to wear if you belong to a certain class and how you're supposed to act and what hairstyle you have. It's very regimented, and it was supposed to answer all questions that people could have about their behavior and their place and how they were supposed to live. So the Ming Code was supposed to introduce low tax rates. It was supposed to honor peasants because peasants were thought to be very essential to survival. It aimed for a fairer government because the law was written down, so everybody was supposed to be equal before the law, and the punishments were across the board supposed to be the same for everyone. The Ming Code also allowed no physical or social mobility. It tried to tie people to the land where they were born. So people, by law, were supposed to get a government certificate to leave the area within 36 square miles from where they were born. So you were not mobile at all physically, and you were also supposed to be socially immobile. What it was trying to do was make it so that you did what your father did, who did what his grandfather did, who did what his great-grandfather did. So through the generations, the same occupation would be passed down from father to son. So farmers were supposed to be tied to their villages, and anybody who produced anything else, any kind of artisan, was supposed to sell what he made to the state. We did have the Ming government allowing merchants to operate and trade, but this was supposed to be very strictly controlled by the government. And even soldiers who were seen as performing an important service for the state were supposed to be very strictly under the control of the government. They were taken from their home areas and posted to frontier zones, and then the tax money that was collected from peasants in kind, like rice, was supposed to be delivered out to those soldiers. So you want to associate the Ming Code with legislation of everything, and then also this social and physical immobility.